We just got some massive breaking news regarding UFC 303. The featured fight on the main card will be Machado Garry versus Michael Venom Page. UFC 303 has gotten a lot better in the last 2 days. We had Khalil Roundtree pulled off the card. They added now Jamal Hill versus Carlos Ulberg with Khalil Roundtree being removed from the card. And now they add Machado Garry versus Michael Venom Page. And I'm really looking forward to this fight. I'm really looking forward to this matchup. And UFC 303 isn't so bad after all. It's not the greatest card, but now at least we got some really solid fights with the addition of Hill versus Ulberg and now Garry versus Page. And I want to start off with this. Go back and watch a video I did back in early March, mid-March, where I discussed Colby Covington's promo on Machado Garry. Go back and watch that video and go look at the comments. Joey's an Machado Garry glazer. All Joey does is take up for Garry, and he doesn't like Colby because of his political beliefs. All because I said that Colby was ducking Garry. I want my apologies. You know what? We'll talk about that later in the video. We'll talk about that more later in the video. Let's start off with the fight itself. I don't want to start off with Colby Covington because this guy deserves to be cut from the organization. Let's start off talking about Machado Garry versus Michael Venom Page, aka MVP. Phenomenal matchup. Great matchmaking by the UFC. And I think this is the best the UFC could do with the current welterweight division, because it looks like they're going to make Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Jack Della Maddalena, which I don't really want to pull that fight apart. That's not official yet, but that's JDM called him out. Shavkat said he would be ready later this year. It looks like it might happen in August at UFC 305. I don't want to pull that fight apart. And everyone thought, it's a no-brainer. Book Garry versus Covington. It makes perfect sense. Colby's been talking all this crap. Colby hasn't won a fight in many years, and he doesn't have a win against somebody really on the active roster, or barely anyone on the active roster. I think he has a win over RDA, who's still on the roster. Doesn't have a win in the top 15. Basically irrelevant, falling down the ranks, having a slide in his career, but generates some buzz with the way he moves his mouth, okay? And he's talking about Gary's wife and all this and that. And it looked like a no-brainer that fight was going to happen. But I knew it from the very jump that wasn't going to happen. Colby is terrified of Garry. Colby wanted nothing to do with Garry from the second this fight was even proposed. And he had a whole master plan of how to duck it. We're going to talk about that later in a minute. And I just think, what other fight are you going to make? Are you going to make Garry versus Usman? Then you run the risk, as the UFC, you run the risk of Usman defeating Garry, and then Usman's kind of in a weird spot depending on if Leon Edwards is still the champion or not. Now, Leon Edwards could lose the championship, and then Usman's right back in the mix, but you wouldn't want Usman to defeat Garry and then Leon still be champion, and then Usman has nowhere to go. And also, Usman's taking some time off, it appears, since that Khamzat short notice fight back in October. It seems like he wants to take some time off after he's been active for so long. So who else are you going to match him up with? Well, you know who has a lot of hype? You know who stylistically would be an incredible matchup, an incredible fight for the pay-per-view? Michael Venom Page. Absolutely love this matchup. I know, some people are going to say, oh, well, he's so far back in the rankings. I don't care about the rankings. I care about the matchups themselves. And I actually think this is a tougher fight for Machado Garry than Colby Covington is. I think Garry would have went out there and brutalized Colby Covington. But the reason I wanted that fight was because the build-up would have been fun. But I'm not a WWE fan. I don't really care that much about the build-up. But what I wanted to truly see was Garry hadn't had his wrestling truly tested yet. So it would have been an answer, even though Colby's on a slide, Colby's on towards the end of his career, Colby's only achievements is losing to Usman twice. We would have saw how good is Gary's wrestling and how good is his cardio, because I'm assuming and I'm hoping the UFC would have made that for 5 rounds. So outside of testing the wrestling, unless Colby was really able to drag him down and hold him up against the fence, which I don't think he would have been able to do, Garry would have beat the brakes off him, probably melted him into the ground, where you have MVP, who's an elite level striker. And I know he came into the UFC, and before he came into the UFC, it's funny, before he came into the UFC, all the UFC shills were like, yeah, MVP's a can crusher. Then he came into the UFC, and then people acted like all of a sudden he was like the elite of the elite. I've kind of had a mixed opinion on MVP. I think MVP is a very, very good fighter. I think he's an elite striker, but I also think he's a can crusher. And I said going into that Kevin Holland fight, I said, look, every time MVP's had to step up in competition, a.k.a. Logan Storley, which actually I thought MVP won, but it was debatable. And you go back to the Douglas Lima fight back in 2019, but also the second Douglas Lima fight, which was a split decision win in 2021. I thought he lost that. So it's like every time MVP had to step up in competition, he lost. But I actually didn't think Kevin Holland was a step up in competition. I'm not a big believer in Kevin Holland at all. I think Kevin Holland's a literal scrub. I said Kevin Holland's like your mid-tier PFL Bellator fighter. That's what Kevin Holland is. And guess who Michael Venom Page has made a career on beating up? Mid-tier Bellator fighters. That's what he's made a career of. He went out there and beat the brakes off of Kevin Holland. I think that proves a little bit, but I don't think it proves a whole lot. And I think with this matchup, Michael Venom Page has the opportunity to put himself one fight away from a potential title shot. Ian Machado Garry, I understand he doesn't have the best wins right now. He's coming off a win over Jeff Neal, which I think is a quality win, but I still think obviously he needs like 2 more fights to fight for a title. But if MVP comes in and imagine he beats Garry, imagine the amount of fans he's going to garner from that, because it's the hot topic to hate on Garry. Colby Covington, that was his opportunity to try to earn some fans back, which he's no longer going to have that opportunity. MVP, I don't know if he's going to talk that much trash. He'll probably say a little bit here and there. He is kind of brash. But also, for MVP, this is the best possible matchup. MVP has dog shit wrestling. Even though I think MVP is a tougher matchup for Garry, I think MVP loses to Colby easily because he has no grappling. Look at what Logan Storley did to him. And I even thought he won that because Storley did no damage on the ground, but MVP couldn't get up. MVP can be taken down at will and controlled. And Colby would have been able to do that. Now, MVP, of course, has worked on that, so maybe MVP still beats him because MVP's light years ahead of Colby on the feet. But against Garry, Gary's not most likely not going to implement offensive wrestling. So stylistically, this is a banger. You have Garry, who's a technical striker, uses a lot of straight shots, but wants to keep the fight on the feet. And you have MVP, who's kind of this showboating, wild, crazy striker who has horrible takedown defense and horrible wrestling deficiencies, but he's fighting a guy that has a lot of hype behind him who's not going to implement the offensive wrestling unless he absolutely has to. So I have to applaud the UFC for this matchmaking. Ultimately, I do love this fight. I do think it helped boost up UFC 303. It was looking like it was going to be a horrible card. I think it's a smart decision for the UFC to put Garry on this card, the headliner being Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler, considering Gary's kind of trying to follow in the footsteps of McGregor a little bit outside of, taking people into the public restrooms non-consensually. And I think this is a smart move by the UFC, and I think this builds a contender no matter what. If MVP wins, he's 2 fights away from a title shot. If Garry wins, he's 1 fight away from a title shot, especially if he wins spectacular. And this fight has the potential to be really exciting. I do see, I can already see people probably saying this. I do see some people probably saying like this could end up being a stinker because both of them love to counter-strike. But ultimately, I think this fight will be fun. I think it will be entertaining. And I think, both guys have an opportunity here to make the most of this and to propel themselves really into title contention. I think if Garry wins, a lot of the Garry haters are going to say, he beat up MVP, he beat up a Bellator washout, and MVP's, ranked not even in the top 10. I believe he's ranked like somewhere between 10 and 15, maybe like 13 or 14 right now. I think a lot of people are going to be detractors if Garry does win. But if MVP wins, I think a lot of people will jump on the MVP train because MVP has a massive opportunity here to beat a guy that a lot of fans are rallying against. So ultimately, I love this matchup all the way around. I don't really have any complaints outside of looking at the welterweight division and looking at the top of the division. You have guys like Shavkat, Usman, Leon Edwards. And I feel like the welterweight's one of the heavy grappling, heavy divisions. And I wanted to see Garry really heavily tested against a grappler before we really got him to the top. I wanted to see him tested. It's like when you see these prospects, it seems like it's always the wrestler. You're like, oh, I want to see him against a wrestler. I want to see him against a wrestler. I remember Conor McGregor at one point. People were, I want to see him against a wrestler. So for me, selfishly, I wanted to see Garry against Colby because I wanted to see him against a wrestler, but I also wanted to see Garry make Colby pay for all the clownish shit that he was saying, but I knew Colby was going to duck this fight. So I never even had my hopes up for this fight. I never even had my hopes up that fight would happen. We're actually going to take a look at a clip in a second. I clipped out one of my videos. I'm also going to post it on my Instagram. But overall, early prediction, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I'm going Garry. I think Garry gets it done. I don't put a crazy amount of stock into Michael Venom Page beating Kevin Holland, who just shows up for a paycheck time in and time out. I think Gary's the better striker. I think Michael Venom Page is there to be hit. I think he slows down. And also, I think if Gary wanted to wrestle and mix in the clinch, I think he's pretty good in the clinch. I think he's pretty strong in the clinch. Neil Magny, I think, would expose Michael Venom Page. I really do. I know that sounds crazy, and maybe Neil Magny's on the decline, but Neil Magny from a couple years ago definitely would have exposed MVP right now. And Gary against Neil Magny was able to destroy him, exit the clinch. Jeff Neal's decent in the clinch as well and has nasty power. And Gary, there was times where there was laws in the action in the clinch, and Gary held his own. So I think if Gary was really losing in this fight, I think he could push MVP up against the fence, beat him up with some knees, and then also look for takedowns and mix that in. I do think he could. So I just think Gary has more ways to win, and I also think he's more technical. So I'm going to go Ian Machado Garry to get it done. I'll say I'm going to pick him to get it done via TKO. I'm going to pick Ian Machado Garry. I'm going to say third round TKO. I think he comes out looking to make a statement performance. Michael Venom Page keeps his hands down. He's used to fighting some scrubs, and Gary is not a scrub, especially not on the feet. I think Gary clips him in the second or third round and puts him away. But of course, as we get closer, I'll do a full breakdown and prediction of this fight. Now, I want to go back to a couple months ago, mid-March, and I want to show you guys a clip from a video where I broke down Ian Machado Garry and Colby Covington, and Colby Covington's call out on the boat, and then you had Ian Garry's response. I want to take a look at a clip from that video. Let's take a look, and then we'll come back and react to it. Earlier today, Colby Covington released a pathetic call-out video of Ian Machado Garry on his Instagram, and I see people saying, yeah, Colby Covington really destroyed Ian Machado Garry in this one, and Colby Covington is so smart for calling out Ian Machado Garry, and I'm here to tell you, it couldn't be further from the truth. Colby Covington has a master plan here, and I'll give you a little spoiler, and we're going to break it down and prove it all in this video with receipts. Colby Covington is terrified of Ian Machado Garry, and this video was him actively ducking. Colby Covington here is looking for an out because he is terrified of Ian Machado Garry. He doesn't believe that he can beat Ian Machado Garry. So the best thing that he can do is to continue to be an internet troll. And if he's an internet troll and he shits on Machado Garry, people will be like, oh, Colby's so funny, Colby's so funny. And then when Gary never meets any of these demands, Colby's going to be like, I gave him an opportunity. He didn't want it. I gave him an opportunity. I got my sights set on Wonderboy. Count on that. In the next, couple weeks to a month, he's going to say, I gave Gary his opportunity. He didn't want it. He was too scared. But the truth is, Colby doesn't want this fight. I've been saying it from the beginning. Colby Covington will duck Ian Machado Garry with every bone in his body. And unless Dana White in the UFC really forces it, then it's not going to happen. So there you go. I hate to tell you I told you so, but I told you so. Colby Covington was selling you wolf tickets. Go back and watch that video from the middle of March. The thumbnail has Colby on a boat, and then you have Gary in the suit, and it says, Colby Covington makes pathetic call out. And I knew that this guy was never, ever going to fight Gary. And go look. I want you to go look at that video and go look at the comments. So many people say, Joey, you don't know what you're talking about. Colby's promoting the fight. You're a Gary Glazer. Joey, why are you sucking up to Gary? I just tried to tell you guys, look, this fight's not going to happen. Colby is terrified. And this wholeheartedly just proves exactly what I've been telling you guys for months. And everyone was telling me I'm wrong. So I have to take a victory lap here. I have to say I told you so. Colby Covington, I'm going to make a video about this maybe this weekend, maybe next week, depending on when I get time. Colby Covington's career with this duck should officially be over. He should be ostracized and shamed to no end because this was the fight for Colby Covington to try to earn some fans back. And I truly believe, we talk about the incel MMA community who's obsessed with fighters talking about other people's wives. I think they should be pissed as well. Because even if Colby would have ultimately lost to Gary, you guys would have loved that presser. Gary would have, showed up and said some probably corny lines, and Colby would have been like, your wife's a whore, and blah, 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 and said all these crazy things, and you guys would have been like, oh yeah, please degrade his wife. Oh my God, I love it because I don't talk to any women. You guys should be pissed at Colby Covington. You guys should be literally so upset that this fight isn't happening because, again, at the end of the day, even if Gary was to beat Colby, you would have had a legendary press conference, at least in your guys' eyes. I wouldn't have seen it that way because I would have saw it as, oh, this is a professional fighter attacking someone's wife. But at the end of the day, he only did that. And the reason I'm covering this so extensively, even in this video, the reason he did that was to grift some of you guys, to try to earn some of his fans back after he absolutely shit the bed against Leon Edwards. And then I knew ultimately he puts out, oh, the three stipulations. I knew ultimately that was just a convoluted way to eventually say, Gary didn't do it. So Gary ducked me. You guys, you don't have to like Gary. Never let Colby live this down. The guy's career should essentially be over. He should be cut from the organization. That is a fight that we should have saw for UFC 303, and the hype would have been crazy. The hype would have, I mean, what a massive opportunity that would have been for Colby. Imagine Colby beats Gary on one of the biggest cards of the year. Colby might have been able to actually earn some star power that people have been alleging he has for years, even though on submissive radio, he's doing like 20K views for an interview now. You know, he could have earned some of those fans back, but instead he decides, you know what? I'll take some of this Dana White privilege. I'll continue sucking off Donald Trump. And mark my words, I'm going to call this too in this video. I don't think the UFC is going to be mad at him. Maybe a little bit. I think they'll probably give him a favorable matchup in his next fight. Probably give him the dead corpse of Wonderboy Thompson or something along those lines. Because Dana White is a Donald Trump sycophant. Colby Covington is a Donald White sycophant. Or Donald Trump sycophant. I said Donald White is a Donald Trump sycophant. So therefore, they're two peas in a pod here. Dana White continues to give Colby Covington opportunities just because their political beliefs align. And it's an absolute disgrace to the sport, especially when it's title shots. So hopefully, Colby actually has to fight someone, a legit contender, and doesn't try to pick off 40-year-old dead bodies who are scared of anyone that wrestled in middle school. I hope that's the case. But I think they're going to give him a favorable matchup when he finally returns. And honestly, I hope Gary calls him out. I hope Gary beats up MVP and then calls out Colby again. But fans will probably criticize him. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and thank you so much for watching.